What do the people who stand beside the most hated regents of all time do when the world they made collapses around them? Not soldiers, not generals, but wives, women who have shared their homes and their secrets, and who one day would pass on the last words from a dying husband. As Nazi Germany fell in 1945 and disappeared from the map, choices also had to be made by the women married to its top figures. Some went with their husbands to death. Some, meanwhile, saw those close and dear destroyed in one way or another. Others were captured and interrogated, or simply disappeared, with few knowing where they had gone in the first place. Yet astonishingly, a small number made it through to tell their stories, back in the relative safety of an Allied prison cell. Who were they? Were they innocent passers-by in a nightmare? Or were they among the silent co-conspirators of one of the gravest crimes in history? Did they really believe in this regime, or cling to their privileges and responsibilities out of loyalty, even when nothing right remained for them? This story isn't about the generals and battle tactics. It's about the private world of the Nazi government hierarchy and what happened to the wives they left behind. History fails to remember any of the people who give orders, but not the men who start wars. And behind regimes are always wives and families. Their stories are rarely known to the public. Nazi Germany was typical in this respect. Hitler surrounded himself with loyal ministers and generals when he rose high enough to do so, and standing beside most of these men were wives who shared in their good fortune and fate. Some of these were ambitious individuals, whereas others were just taking life as it came with no particular effort involved on their part at all. But when the Third Reich fell apart, these women were confronted by decisions more catastrophic than any given battlefield command. At the heart of our story is Magda Goebbels, wife of propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. Considered Germany's unofficial First Lady, she was stylish, charismatic, and deeply devoted to Adolf Hitler. Trapped in the Führer bunker on May 1, 1945, Magda and Joseph murdered their 6 young children before taking their own lives. It was an act of fanatical devotion that even hardened Nazis found horrifying. On April 29, 1945, Eva Braun, who had been mistress to Adolf Hitler for over 15 years, officially became his wife inside the bunker. Less than 40 hours later, she joined him in death by taking cyanide. Earlier photographs show Eva Braun laughing at Berghof retreats. However, when forced to choose, she chose death over captivity. Elsewhere, other Nazi wives were being detained and undergoing interrogation. Life still had its enchantments for Emmy Goering, wife of Luftwaffe commander Hermann Goering. After she was arrested in 1945, they declared her a minder belastete, a slightly lesser offender. She was sentenced to a year in prison, and afterward she lived quietly. Her unyielding stand never slackened. Although she wrote a different version of her life story in later years, she maintained out to the end that she was only her husband's loyal wife, never a political one. Ilse Hess, the wife of Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, received similar treatment. In 1947, she was apprehended and questioned. Determined, she argued that her husband was not guilty. Ilse was turned loose in 1948. She spent the next 20 years defending Rudolf's name and finally, in her old age, wrote a memoir that tells all about his imprisonment. Margareta Himmler, wife of Heinrich Himmler, was captured with her daughter Gudrun in Italy. After being questioned, she claimed to be ignorant of the Holocaust and was released in November 1946. Officially, she was categorized as only a minor adherent of the Nazis. What is interesting is that with the exception of a few who accepted their husband's inheritance in the form of earned money, none of the wives were executed at Nuremberg or imprisoned for long periods. Most faded into civilian life. Some, like Emmy Goering and Ilse Hess, later wrote memoirs. In these, they typically denied any knowledge of atrocities while presenting themselves as victims. Won by bribery, a number of male officials took the secret rat line to South America, but none of this contingent found a place abroad. Whether they gave up with resignation, sickened, or found no chance to escape, they either surrendered or dropped out of sight. Their offspring bore the heavy burden. Etta Goering lived safely in Munich after the end of the war, but she never would discuss her father. Gudrun Himmler was in contrast tenaciously loyal to father, with whom she was arrested when the Gestapo made its final roundups. She married a former Waffen-SS man, and remained active in extremist right-wing politics. In the end, the private world of Nazi Germany's elite women was one of wealth and sorrow. As true believers, or as agents of legitimacy, they wound up their affairs in rapid succession after that terrible, fateful autumn. These wives all shared the fate of their husbands, through death, disgrace, or uneasy survival. Before we move on to the next section, please don't forget to subscribe if you liked the video so far. The dictatorship of Adolf Hitler was now collapsing, and Allied forces advanced on Berlin from different directions. The survivors of the top leadership in Nazi Germany were confronted with a single realistic choice: surrender, be captured, or take their own lives. Yet even in the spotlight of world news coverage, for the generals, the SS leaders, and Hitler himself, the wives of these people were also caught up in a time of settling accounts. Their stories, often less celebrated but arguably more distressing than those of their husbands, wove a complex tapestry involving both denial and calculations for personal survival. In the first wave of Allied interrogations, post-war interrogator teams fanned out to the Nazi authorities and their families. The highest ranking among these women was Emmy Göring, wife of Luftwaffe commander Hermann Göring. Emmy had been a famous actress before the war. However, due to her marriage, she has been catapulted into Germany's ruling elite. During the Third Reich, she entertained foreign dignitaries at elaborate state functions and was photographed holding Hitler's favorite dog. After the fall of Berlin, US troops arrested her for questioning. After the war, Ilse Hess was finally drawn into interrogation. She was the widow of Rudolf Hess, once Hitler's deputy. Following her husband's capture, Ilse stayed in Germany, raising their son Wolf Rudiger. When the war ended, US troops took her away on June 3, 1947, and she was imprisoned at Augsburg-Göggingen. In contrast to Magda Goebbels, Ilse Hess displayed no killing instinct. She remained defiant under cross-examination, appealing to her husband's innocence and the nobility of his motives. Ilse was released in March 1948 and spent the next few decades defending Rudolf Hess's memory, writing a memoir in 1952, England, Nuremberg, Spandau, describing his years of captivity. The fortunes of Gerda Bormann, wife of Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and one of the most feared men in Nazi Germany, took a different direction. In the closing days of the war, as Soviet troops marched through Berlin, Gerda fled with her 10 children to Switzerland, then went to the mountains near northern Italy after receiving refuge from a priestess there. Allied agents found her horribly ill, with advanced uterine cancer. Despite being a major figure in private Nazi elite social circles, Gerda fell too sick to stand trial. She died in a hospital in Murano on April 23, 1946. Her death comes just 1 year after Berlin fell to Soviet forces and brings her son, governor of Bavaria as well as Silesian regional chief, to an untimely end at age 53. 8 of her 10 children survived the war and were either put in foster homes or taken up by distant relatives. Margaret Himmler's story, which tells of an estranged wife and the forsaken wife in fascist Germany, opens up new insight on Nazi wives. During the war, Margareta grew increasingly estranged from her husband, Heinrich Himmler. Himmler's personal life was marked by an affair with his mistress amid the mass murder occurring around him. In May 1945, Margaret and her teenage daughter Gudrun tried to leave Germany. They were caught in Italy on May 13th and interrogated at the Nuremberg trials. Margaret claimed that she did not know about the Holocaust and crimes committed by her husband. Allied officers, perhaps realizing the difficulties of killing someone stripped of everything else, eventually released her in November 1946. A denazification court judged her as a nominal follower rather than an active participant in the Nazi regime. In fact, no wife of a top Nazi official was executed during such long-term confinement as this. Allied occupation governments, eager to stabilize Germany and avoid mass purges, focused on prosecuting male leadership and military figures. In consequence, people like Emmy Göring, Ilse Hess, and Margaret Himmler simply melted back into civilian life. Escape was rare. Unlike male officers in the Nazi Party who eluded after the war, along secret routes over sea or land rat lines that ended up either South America or Middle East countries so distant from Europe, The wives of top leaders made no such dramatic exits. None adopted assumed names or moved to a foreign country. Most gave themselves up to Allied custody or with familial connections, and in the confusion of post-war Germany disappeared into public confidence. Impossible legacies and the original names were passed down to these women's children. Etta Goering, Hermann and Emmy's daughter, managed to avoid being taken in the war's final days and ended up among notaries. She thus lived for many years in post-war Germany, keeping her peace. Not a word of public comment on her father appeared until the 1980s, when she gave one carefully controlled interview. In that interview, Etta spoke very warmly of Hermann Goering, calling him a fine father. However, when asked about his crimes, she would not say anything at all. Gudrun Himmler, daughter of Heinrich Himmler, is one in a line of Nazi scions who have become infamous. She could not bear to part with her father's memories and so refused to denounce the regime which he helped to create. Married to a Waffen-SS officer, she became politically involved with neo-Nazi groups, including those which were set up to help aging ex-SS men. Gudrun remained unrepentant right up until her death in 2018, the very embodiment of a past far too ugly for Germans to ponder. The silence keep them company. The wife of Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, just retired from politics after the war. Only in this way, Margaret Speer was able to reclaim normalcy for her relationship with her husband after his release from Spandau in 1966. She declined to be interviewed and did not leave any memorandum or autobiography. Wilhelmina Keitel, widowed by the execution of Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, vanished similarly into obscurity. Under the long shadow of Nazism, whether defiant or subdued, these women carried with them their character and reputation. In post-war Germany, many areas knew who they were, yet social conventions and legal protections kept them from public view. A few descendants tried to come to grips with their family stories, but others held on to denial to the end. In the end, when the men of the Third Reich suffered military destruction, their wives faced a different battlefield, one of fragmented traditions, unconfessed responsibility, and insecure existence, in a nation that sought only to forget it all. Want to understand the world better? Start with history and subscribe to our channel. After the fall of Nazi Germany, its men leaders either committed suicide following the Nuremberg trials or disappeared through secret underground escape routes. For their wives, however, a different kind of fate began. Rather than taking place in courtrooms, their private lives would forever be overshadowed by their associations. But for these women, a new situation arose. It was one not played out in courtrooms, but instead lay darkly over their whole lives like a shadow forever cast. Some wives lived long enough to see the world condemn their husbands. Others quietly disappeared into history. None spoke openly about what they saw, and even when they did, their accounts often bore traces of denial, selective memory, or, worse still, a desperate attempt to control how history will treat them. After her husband's suicide on October 15, 1946, Mrs. Goering lived for many years. A glamorous friend of Germany's well-to-do, Mrs. Goering emerged from prison to find a cold world without friends. She lived in obscurity, although for the rest of her life she never lost her good spirits. Illustrative of this is the fact that in interviews, memoirs, and private conversations, she never totally broke from the regime. For most of her life, she carved out a role for herself, where she avoided political matters and claimed no share of guilt or responsibility for the decisions made by her husband. My memoir, An Aside to My Life, omitted all reference to the regime's crimes while depicting Hermann Goering as an innocent victim. It is an old story by now, Nazi wives pretending to themselves and everyone else that they were actually the victims. Ilse Hesse's life also went this way around the turn of the 20th century. When she was released from jail in 1948, she devoted the remaining 40 years of her life to fighting for her husband. Rudolf Hess remained incarcerated in solitary confinement in Spandau until his death 1987. Ilse dedicated herself to the man who had defied Hitler by flying to Britain in 1941. She produced a memoir, and speaking to television interviewers made Rudolf into a sort of fallen hero. But as interest in the Hess family waned, Ilse's struggle to present her version of history continued. Illness saw an early end for some. Gerda Bormann succumbed to cancer less than a year after the war ended. Death in 1946 spared her the trials and interrogations of her peers. Yet her children paid for their family name in a society where it was disreputable, growing up in post-war Germany with a name synonymous with fanaticism. The children of these infamous families received a delicate legacy to bear in both Germany and abroad. Etta Göring, doted upon by Hitler as a child and once the queen of German high society, lived a long but discreet life. She avoided the public discussion of her father's heritage for many years. Not until a controlled 1986 interview did she express fondness for Hermann Göring, calling him an affectionate and kind parent, while shoving off responsibility for his acts. Yet she was careful even then to dispose of all suggestions indicating the magnitude of crimes committed under his orders. But Gudrun Himmler, daughter of SS leader Heinrich Himmler, was not so easily cowed. She remained loyal to the memory of her beloved father until her death in 2018. Gudrun married a former Waffen-SS officer and spent years plying the cobbled streets of Vienna with neo-Nazis. She went on to support groups for former members of the SS and their relatives, defending their rights, working to maintain the honor of her own mentioned disgraced people. She was one of the few among Nazi offspring to speak out in public defense of the former regime. While some wives and children of Nazi leaders held fast to denial, others simply lost themselves in anonymity. After her husband's conviction at the Nuremberg war crimes trials, Margaret Speer distanced herself from politics everywhere. Albert served 20 years in Spandau, rejoining his wife in 1966. Unlike some wives, she never gave an interview and left behind no memoirs. The children of Speer's family therefore adopted a policy of silence, leaving it to Albert's own carefully crafted confession to shape public memory of his life and times. Public curiosity about these women waned in the post-war years. Few in a divided, rebuilding Germany wanted to dwell on how those who had lived alongside mass murderers had also lived. The Allied governments, after initial eagerness for evidence, soon became more concerned with hunting down war criminals and settling their own war debts. As a result, most of these women have spent out their lives quietly, their names whispered in small towns or known only to historians. However, their lives did matter, for the things they themselves told us and for the master institutions of slavery they sustained. They were not just onlookers. They held parties to discuss the destinies of countries. They profited from stolen houses and stolen property. The stories of these people show how decent individuals can gradually become deeply mired in despicable behavior, sometimes through the inculcation of beliefs, sometimes through promotion, and sometimes by passively standing idly by. No wives of high-ranking Nazi leaders were ever hanged. None were handed down life sentences, even though many of these women saw their spouses' names become bywords for evil. Somehow they managed to restate or change their personal histories in a post-war world of scrambled moral values. How did the ordinary human become Hitler, Himmler, or Goebbels? And yet, we seldom hear about those who stood beside them. The wives, the mothers, the confidants. Were they blind? Were they believers? Or just pragmatists looking for comfort? These women dined with war criminals. They toasted genocide. They tucked their children into bed in homes looted from the dead. And at the end of the day, when Hitler fell, all of them had their choices. Some followed their husbands to death. Some disappeared. Some rewrote the story to leave themselves out. And so it remains to be asked, should we say that those who turned a deaf ear to such evil were the victims of history, or the cause of it? Let us know what you think in the comments. Do you believe these women were guilty, complicit, or just powerless survivors caught in a nightmare they couldn't escape? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Bye for now.